Remember, a block kick can go the other way, too. He's got to be careful and get it up.
On the way.
The 2013 Auburn Tigers. One of the craziest rags to riches stories you will ever hear in college football. Led by first-year head coach Gus Malzahn, they went to the first season with not much hope, with a Bleacher Report article having them at a worst-case scenario going 2 wins, 10 losses, 0-8 in the SEC, and a best-case scenario of 8-4 in a bowl bid, going 4-4 in the SEC. After not having much to work with in 2012, the Auburn Tigers did not have much hype behind them this year. Before we talk about the 2013 team, let's take a quick look over how the 2012 team did. With only 3 wins and 9 losses, the only wins they had were against Louisiana Monroe, New Mexico State, and Alabama A&M. Not winning a single SEC game, losing to the likes of Mississippi State, Clemson, LSU, Texas A&M, Georgia, Alabama, and even Vanderbilt. The 2012 Auburn team featured Gene Chizik in his 4th year as head coach, 2 years removed from winning the national championship game with Cam Newton against the Oregon Ducks, with their leading quarterback going 62 for 116 with only 753 yards, and the leading rusher Trey Mason with 1,002 yards for 171 carries and 8 touchdowns. A very, very poor and unexcusable team. So now you know what expectations are into the 2013 season. So let's finally have a look at Week 1. The Mike Leach-led Washington State Cougars walked into Jordan-Hare Stadium as 2-touchdown underdogs. Many saw that as a pretty intriguing game that would show the future for both of the teams. After a pretty back-and-forth game, the Tigers prevailed and won 31-24 over the Cougars. Auburn Tigers quarterback Nick Marshall didn't shock many people, only going 10 for 19, 99 yards, and no touchdowns. Although Auburn run the ball hard, amassing 295 yards on the ground, with their leading rusher Corey Grant getting 146 yards and 1 touchdown for just 9 rushes. Auburn's defense really showed up turnover-wise as they picked off Washington State quarterback Connor Holiday 3 times. The Mike Leach-led Cougars would eventually end the season just 6-7. The Arkansas State Red Wolves came to Auburn also 2-touchdown underdogs. Ironically, the former head coach for Arkansas State was then Auburn head coach Gus Malzahn, whom he had just left the team. Auburn mopped the floor with Arkansas State, winning 38-9. Quarterback Nick Marshall also went 10 for 17, 147 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Far better than Week 1, but still not up to the normal SEC standard. Auburn also went heavy on the run attack with 301 rushing yards. On the other side of the ball, quarterback Alexander Kennedy for Arkansas State went 30 for 42, 284 yards, also being the team's leading rusher with the game for 12 rushes and 74 yards. The Red Wolves finished their season 8-5. Things are looking positive for the Tigers leading into Week 3. In both teams' conference opener, Dan Mullen, just 5 years into his head coaching stint at Mississippi State, came into Auburn as a 7-point underdog. In a very pass-heavy game, Auburn pulled out with the win 24-20. Nick Marshall went 23 for 34, 339 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. His best game so far this entire season. And Dak Prescott of the Mississippi State Bulldogs went 15 for 28, 213 yards, and no touchdowns, far from his future NFL stardom. Dak was also the team's leading rusher with 22 carries, 133 yards, and 2 touchdowns, while Auburn's Corey Grant went 8 carries for just 44 yards. The Mississippi State Bulldogs would go on to go 7-5, and the Auburn Tigers, now sitting at 3-0, are riding high. Until Auburn entered LSU as a 16-point underdog. Things did not look good for them, as LSU ended up winning 35-21. Nick Marshall went 17 for 33, 224 yards, 2 interceptions, and LSU quarterback Zach Mettenberger went 14 for 22, 229 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Auburn now 3-1 after an expected yet disappointing loss. After a bye week in Week 5, Auburn would play against Ole Miss in Jordan-Hare, the number 24 ranked Rebels. Auburn's still unranked heading into Week 6, facing off against their division rival. Another very small passing game from Auburn as Nick Marshall went 11 for 17 for 93 yards, but ran for 140 for 2 touchdowns and just 14 carries. Auburn escaped with a 30-22 win over the Rebels, with their first top 25 win of the year, with it also being against an SEC West opponent. Things were starting to look good for Auburn. Auburn still sits unranked, but 4-1. I'm not going to talk much about this game as it was just dominated by Auburn on both sides of the ball. Nick Marshall didn't play in this game, but it didn't seem to bother Auburn as they went on to win with their backup Jeremy Johnson, 62-3. Auburn now sits pretty at 5-1 and is finally ranked number 24 at the beginning of Week 8. In Week 8, Auburn travels to a very intimidating atmosphere in College Station, Texas, to face off against the number 7 Texas A&M Aggies. There wasn't much expected for the Tigers to defeat the Aggies, as Auburn was a 12-point underdog to Texas A&M. Auburn was down 24-17 at halftime, but finished the game to win, 45-41. This was also during Johnny Manziel's time with the Texas A&M Aggies, as they were a scary team for the SEC West, but Auburn very surprisingly prevailed and won the game in shocking fashion. After the game, Auburn jumped up to the number 11 spot, a large jump from 24 and very far from where they would have been at the beginning of the season. There are now new hopes for Auburn to do good this season. Maybe not a national championship, but maybe a New Year's Six bowl game appearance at best. But let's keep looking toward the future. Week 9 homecoming against the Florida Atlantic Owls. As they were going into this game, Auburn quarterback Nick Marshall was still not 100%, so they put in backup quarterback Jeremy Johnson, who actually had to forego his opportunity to redshirt to play in this game, but Johnson nevertheless had a decent game, beating the Owls 45-10. Week 8 at Arkansas. The Razorbacks started off the year 3-0 and looked to have a decent year, but they would go on to lose the next 5 games. Then they still lost to number 11 Auburn, 35-17. Auburn played a really heavy run game with their leading rusher Trey Mason having 168 rushing yards, 32 carries, and 4 touchdowns. Nick Marshall only went 7 for 8, but shockingly 118 yards for only 7 completions and a passing touchdown, which comparing the completions to yards is a very, very good game. Week 11 at Tennessee. This was not a pretty game. Auburn, now ranked number 9, defeated the Volunteers 55-23. Auburn did not have a pretty passing game, but man, the QB scrambling game ended up being unbelievable, as quarterback Nick Marshall had 14 rushes for 214 yards and 2 touchdowns. Unbelievable. Although his passing game was 3 for 7, 35 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Auburn is still riding super high, a lot better than most people expected for this season. Now sitting at 9-1, the Tigers are looking for a chance at the SEC championship, but they still have 2 very tough opponents to look forward to. Week 12 against Georgia. In the beginning of this game, Auburn had the upper hand, leading 27-10 at halftime. Then they traded scores, and Auburn got up 38-37 with only 1:49 remaining as Auburn got the ball. Later in the drive, it was 4th and 8 for Auburn, and in a near 75-yard play, then became known as the Miracle in Jordan-Hare.
4th and 18 for the Tigers. Here's your ball game. Nick Marshall stands in, steps up, going to throw downfield, just a home run ball, and it is tipped off. And Lewis caught it on the deflection. Lewis is going to score. Lewis is going to score. Lewis is going to score. Touchdown Auburn. Touchdown Auburn. A miracle in Jordan-Hare. A miracle in Jordan-Hare.
Auburn would end up winning 43-38 in one of the craziest game endings of the year. It had nothing close to what would happen just 2 weeks later.
Christian Jones. There are no...
And look again. Let's see if they come again. Picking up quicker. He's got them deep.
Yes, he does. The Andrew White. Yeldon. And here's his best run of the night. He spins his way. We know it might be a touchdown. Nobody's going to catch T.J. Yeldon. He's gone.
After a bye week on week 13, it was time to play their in-state rival, the Alabama Crimson Tide, in the Iron Bowl in Auburn. The Iron Bowl, one of the most famous rivalries in not only the SEC but all of college football, as the number 4 Auburn Tigers, who were 10-1, faced off against the number 1 Crimson Tide, 11-0. And one of the most anticipated Iron Bowls in history. It was very back and forth. At halftime, the Crimson Tide was leading 21-14. Auburn then answered back with a touchdown after halftime to make it 21-21. Alabama then answered back even stronger with a 99-yard, one-play drive for a touchdown to take the lead. After many punts and many missed kicks, Auburn finally tied it up 28-28 with 32 seconds left to go. With many Auburn fans wanting it to at least head to overtime, and Bama wanted to take the lead and win the game in the final 30 seconds, Alabama would run the ball up near the 40-yard line with time running out. Or did it? Saban challenged the time, thinking it had 1 second remaining. After a very anxious long time of referees talking amongst themselves, they came to the conclusion that the Crimson Tide still had 1 second left on the clock before the runner stepped out of bounds. Coach Nick Saban had a very big decision to make here. Does he risk the field goal, where they have not had any success in kicking the ball and try to win the game, or throw a Hail Mary to win, or kneel it and go into overtime? Saban picked the field goal, and with 1 second remaining, they lined up to make a 56-yard field goal, taking out senior starting kicker Cade Foster and putting in freshman kicker Adam Griffith. And with 1 second remaining, with Ryan Smith in the backfield for the Tigers, they lined up, and Auburn called a timeout to ice the kicker. Later in the timeout, they lined again, changing what had actually ended up being a 57-yard attempt. They put in Chris Davis in the backfield, replacing Ryan Smith, who was in the play earlier. And let's watch and see what happens next.
Mandel will hold it. Now they've officially made it 57 yards.
Number 8 blocked kick can go the other way, too. He's got to be careful and get it up.
On the way. No, returned by Chris Davis. Davis goes left. Davis gets a block. Davis has another block. Chris Davis. No flags. Touchdown. Auburn. An answered prayer.
Chris Davis ended up returning the missed field goal back 109 yards for a game-winning touchdown, sending the Tigers to the SEC championship. They had defeated the Crimson Tide 34-28. In the most shocking endings of all time, topping the crazy ending versus Georgia only 2 weeks ago, the conference championship week was set up against Missouri in Atlanta. Auburn came into the game just a week removed from defeating the Crimson Tide. Now ranked number 3, they faced off against the number 5 ranked Missouri Tigers in another highly anticipated SEC matchup, this time for the SEC Championship and the opportunity to play in the National Championship for the Tigers. Auburn would end up winning in very, very good fashion against Missouri, 59-42, sealing their contention for a national championship. After Michigan State defeated the Ohio State Buckeyes in the Big Ten Championship to knock down Ohio State from the number 2 slot, it was then determined the number 2 Auburn Tigers would face off against the number 1 Florida State Seminoles for the national championship. January 6th, national championship against the number 1 Florida State Seminoles. After a crazy season, Auburn finally has the opportunity to play for what they've been fighting for this entire season. After starting the season just unranked and not expected to do anything big, the Auburn Tigers are here with their first-year head coach Gus Malzahn, and it was their time to show the world who they were. At halftime, the Tigers were winning 21-10. Then after a really back-and-forth third quarter and a dominating fourth quarter comeback for the Seminoles would win 34-31, ending the season for the Tigers for no national championship. This season, all for nothing, as everyone would say, but I beg to differ, as this team should be recognized. They should be recognized for denying all of the naysayers and persevering through all the triumphs, becoming one of the craziest teams to ever play SEC college football. Even though they lost the national championship game, Auburn still had a wonderful season, with many big wins, big plays, great players, great moments. This Auburn team should be recognized as one of the greatest to ever play and not win the national championship. This Auburn team is still one of the best SEC teams, in my opinion, and honestly, to go off script here, it was an emotional experience as a fan of college football to watch them push through everything that they were fighting for, and they did a wonderful job. This was the rags to riches story of the 2013 Auburn Tigers. Thank you for watching.